During the Renaissance period, master painters like Leonardo da Vinci, Michelangelo, Raphael, and Donatello needed to find a much effective way, mas effective na paraan in order to translate what they study about or what they see into their drawings. Their studies are mostly composed of architectural studies, study of the human anatomy, and a lot more. But they needed to translate it in to their art sa paraang mas real, sa mas makatotohanan na paraan. That is why today we will try to develop what we call rendering techniques. Maraming paraan para mag-render or mag-translate ng mga visual studies ng mga artists into art, okay, or sa paper. We have certain techniques na ginagamit natin sa sketching or dibuho in Tagalog. Now, these studies uses the following rendering techniques. Yan, so yung mga nakikita nyong sketch, ginagamitan sila ng rendering techniques for them to look real or to look much accurate based doon sa naging source nila. Okay, we will first study about one of the techniques na pinakamadaling gawin. This technique is called hatching. Now, hatching is a combination of diagonal and straight lines layered together to create dimension and shadows. So basically, you just combine lines with equal spaces. They are supposed to be equal to create the illusion of shadows and highlights. So even sa shadows, nagagamit siya. One cool thing with hatching is you can use it to layer different colors. Let's try to use to create a different effect. So madali siyang gamitin sa layering. Okay? This is one of the techniques that you can use. This is called hatching. The most common, however, is called shading. Now, shading is done by turning your pencil ng slant ng kaunti, parang obtuse angle relative to the paper, okay? So, you make sure that the lead or the edge of the pencil is medyo flat, so you won't have sharp surfaces. Now, shading is often used by charcoal artists to make realistic renderings ng kanilang artwork. Okay? So, some of us are confused with another technique, which is smudging. Yung ginaganito. We smudge it with cotton or other materials, pero we will avoid that whenever we can. So, X tayo sa smudging. Shading is entirely with just the pencil alone. So it creates a soft rendering of your subject or your basis. So as you can see, rendering seems a bit more realistic, and hatching is a bit stylized. But oftentimes, hatching is used with pens and other materials like pencils, crayons, and etc. And shading is often used in portraitures naman. Okay, we also have another technique. Well, this is called texturing. It's just simply using random shapes such as curves to imply the visual texture and the actual texture of your subject. So for example, this is a fur ball or a ball with lots of hairs. So in order to show that visually, I will create the rendering. I will use this kind of rendering technique to show dimensions. Again, same with cross hatching, you can layer two different colors to create a different effect or dimension as well, diba? If you can layer colors like this, you can have different kinds of visual effects sa iyong rendering. Now the goal is you always look in your subject, and always try to capture the essence of the subject. So minsan less is more will work, but sometimes you can still add a bit more to make it, well, kamukha ng subject. Lastly, one of the basic rendering techniques that you can use is called stippling. Or pointillism. Now, pointillism is just simple. You just create small dots. By stippling your pencil, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, or slowly dabbing it onto the paper. Now, stippling is a bit tedious, no? Because the closer the dots are, the darker the color will be, or the darker the rendering will be. But the wider the distance between the dots, the lighter the rendering color will be. Now, let's practice one today. We will be doing hatching. So get your materials and your papers too, and let's start drawing. For this exercise, you will be needing the following materials: paper, colored pencils, markers, and any pencil that has an eraser on it, or an eraser.
A few moments later.
Now, let us practice cross hatching or hatching technique. Now, as I have said, hatching is a rendering technique that uses lines, equally spaced lines. So, hindi siya rushed. Pwedeng rushed if you master it na. Pero for our training, you will do it slowly. So, we will have consistent distance between our hatching. So, it can be diagonal, or the opposite direction, or it can be horizontal. So, what we will do is we will draw squares. Okay? It doesn't need to be perfect, and let's make it na parang cube. We will draw 3 cubes, okay? Another here. Okay. I'll give you time so that you can draw your 3 cubes. Okay. If you're ready, you can go through with the video now. Now, one thing that we need to remember when we are rendering or when we're practicing rendering is let us remember where the light source is. Okay? So, tatandaan ninyo kung nasan yung ilaw. Kung nasan ang ilaw. Okay? For example, lahat ng ilaw ay nandito sa upper right corner ng bawat cube. Okay? So, common sense, okay, upon analysis, na halimbawa tayo ay nasa katawan ni Leonardo da Vinci or Michelangelo. We look at the subject and we notice that the upper right corner is the light source, where the light source is. So, automatically, the darkest part, if this part is not illuminated or has no light, the darkest part will be right here. Okay? But let's try to apply hatching first. Now, we will be doing it in this manner. We will be creating the renders with these lines. So for the first box, we will create with just one set of line, one layer of line, two layer of lines for the second, and 3 lines for the third. Let's try. Knowing that this is the darker side, I will use a diagonal hatching. Make sure that they are evenly spaced. Slowly. Okay. That is my darkest side. Okay? Now, onto the next side. I use the opposite. But because this is the lightest side, I will slowly omit the hatching towards the light source. You see? Okay. I proceed to the top. Slowly omitting the hatching towards the light source. Okay. Let's fix the corners. That is how you render with just one layer of hatching. No, notice how I left out spaces. Notice how I left out spaces para dun pinapakitang tumatama yung light source. Now, let's try to do the same with 2 lines. Okay? I just outlined the corners so you can see. Now you can alter the distance between the lines, but make sure that their distances are consistent pa rin. Because altering the distance can make it darker, okay? I'm putting in my first layer of hatching. Now, I'll be putting in my second, but this time, I'll be putting in the opposite direction of my first side. So, if I put in right diagonal, for the second layer, I will put left diagonal. Okay? Let's try. Again, opposite. But with consideration to the light source, so you can omit some parts or some areas and leave it as is. Okay? Again, you can omit some parts. Notice that I'm moving the paper around, okay? It makes it easier to render kasi I don't have to move my arms. I just move the paper around. Okay, to the last side. Maybe I can use some okay. See the difference, okay? With 2 layers of hatching, or what we call cross hatching. Okay, try to remember the term. When we have 1 or more, 2 or more lines rather, in hatching we call it cross hatching. Okay, because it uses two opposite line or two crossing line. Okay? Next. Now, notice how it differs with each other, di ba? Mas may dimension kapag two lines ang gamit mo. However, this is much stylistic and minimalist. Pero we are following the rules ng mga Renaissance master painters na they wanted to translate reality into their paintings, okay? Or sketches rather, okay? Now, we move on to the third, and I'll be doing it with you guys, so I hope you're catching up with me. So, we'll put in my first line. Again, with consideration to the direction and your light source as well. Okay, I'll be putting in the opposite, second line. Now, I'll be putting in the third. Now, the third depends on your intuition kung anong mag-work best doon sa inyong sketch. But for this, I'll be using more of horizontal line dito sa harap. Okay. Then I'll be using diagonal here. Make more dimensions. Leave out. Okay. See how the three cubes changed? Depende doon sa dami ng lines na ginamit and the closer that they are. Okay? Now, let's try to add shadow doon sa third. Okay? The light source is coming here from here, right? So, common sense na nandito ang shadow niya. Okay? Doon sa opposite side or sa likod ng ating light source. But I will be using cross-hatching as well. Following the direction of the shadow. And I'll erase a part malapit doon sa ating figure para meron siyang secondary shadow na mas light kaysa doon sa primary shadow. Okay. Now, basically that's how you render using basic lines lang, di ba? You can translate the things that you observe to your sketches or your visual studies bago kayo mag-paint. And over time, as you practice and you go along, you can achieve something like this. Okay? Notice how the value is kept and dimensions as well. Let's see kung anong technique ang ginamit. Can you observe anong rendering technique ang ginamit sa sketch na ito? You're right, that's hatching and cross-hatching. Okay? Medyo directional lang and medyo textural lang ang approach na ginamit dahil ginamit yung hatching as a texture for the wooden vase. Okay? So that's cross-hatching. Now, the challenge is for you guys to create your own sketch or your own visual study in just 15 minutes using the technique in rendering called cross-hatching. Now, just like this, you need to consider the value, the angle of the artwork, and please use any household materials na makikita nyo and set it up in such a way, can you see it right now? Okay, in such a way na maganda ang composition niya. Now, you can use any two-colored pencils or crayons or pens, as long as, well, makaka-drawing kayo, no? You can use any two colors, okay, and combine it, okay, so that you can achieve a different visual effect. If you want your sketch to be visually astounding, you can create and mix two colors together in cross-hatching. But if you don't want to, well, you can still use a single colored pencil or any pencil na meron kayo. Have fun!